Kia ora, everybody. While we're waiting for more people to join us, please pop in the chat where you're watching from and what organisation you're from, and we'll get started in the next few moments. Okay, everybody, we are on the hour, so I'm going to make a start. Kia ora, hello and greetings to you all. Welcome to the 5th IZD webinar of this series. As a reminder, these webinars are designed to help you unpack social change for conservation at the World Zoo and Aquarium Conservation Education Strategy. This series has been created by IZD and their board to provide you support and training in how to meet this new strategy. Today's webinar is all about Chapter 5 of the strategy and has the title Integrating Animal Care and Welfare into Conservation Education. I'm Dr. Sarah Thomas. I'm the Head of Conservation Advocacy and Engagement at Auckland Zoo in New Zealand, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's webinar. And we also have Kim and Timna, who are today's tech supervisors. So today's session, we have two speakers. We're going to hear from Charles Wilson from Wellington Zoo in New Zealand, and then we'll go over to Amanda Belinsky from Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago. And then later joining us for the panel session is Leanne Wilson from Zoos Victoria in Australia, who's one of our IZD board members. So as we're starting, just a bit of housekeeping. So please be aware that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on our IZD YouTube channel. So by staying and participating, you consent to being part of this recording. And hello to all the viewers who are watching this later on the IZD YouTube channel. And as a note, if you've missed any of the previous webinars, you can find these all now on our YouTube channel. As this is a webinar, all viewers will be on mute, but you can ask lots of questions if you like. Pop them in the Q&A box, put some comments in the chat box, and let us know your thoughts and feelings on the presentations that we have today. So to get us started, we're going to have some polls. So Kim, if we can have a couple of polls to start us off and get us going. So what you should see if you're watching this live is the poll that says, please choose your IZD membership level. So are you an institutional member, individual member, associate member, or not an IZD member at all? And then the second question is asked, how did you hear about this webinar? So through social media, websites, emails, or through your regional representative or from a colleague. So we'll just give you a minute or two to have a think about those and pop your responses in the poll. Okay, so you should also be seeing the results now. So the majority of our viewers today are institutional members, 55%. And the one that you heard most about is the IZD email. So 45% of you heard about this webinar from our IZD email. So it's really great to hear that we've got those communication channels working and that you're hearing about the webinars that we're doing. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and then we are going to go straight over to our first presenter, who is Charles Wilson. Kia ora, Charles. Charles is the team leader of learning at Wellington Zoo in New Zealand. Over to you.
Okay, kia ora koutou, ko Charles Wilson toku ingoa. Good morning, everyone. My name's Charles Wilson, and as Sarah said, I am the team leader learning at Wellington Zoo in New Zealand. So if you give me 1 second, I'll share my screen with you and you can see what we've been doing. Cool. How are we looking?
Yep, perfect.
That's what we want. Great. Okay, so Today, I'd like to share with you some of the work that we've been doing at Wellington Zoo to help our visitors understand the role of the zoo in animal care and welfare. So there were several starting points for this work. And one of them is Wellington Zoo's overall kaupapa or ethos, me tiaki kia ora, which roughly translates as, we must look after all things so that they may flourish. This kaupapa informs everything we do at the zoo, and so all our work, all our projects must align with that. In practice, that's mostly a big emphasis on animal welfare, but it's also got a large influence on our visitor-facing activities like talks, school visits, anything that's visitor-related. Another starting point is the shift to using the 5 domains of animal welfare to measure animal welfare in zoos and aquariums. And so that's inspired by the launch of the Zoo and Aquarium Association Australasia's Animal Welfare Accreditation in 2014 and the publication of WZACES Caring for Wildlife in 2015. And finally, Wellington Zoo conducted some visitor research to find out how our visitors and community saw the zoo. And we found that visitors were actually very positive in their perception of the animals at Wellington Zoo being healthy and well cared for. The research also showed that the Wellington community believes that good animal welfare is the single most important aspect that a zoo provides, ahead of conservation and education. So that was a really great starting point. However, we felt that we didn't yet communicate the scientific and professional approach to animal welfare at the zoo in depth, and we wanted to interpret and share that science work that we do as a story that was accessible for the zoo audience. So the challenge we gave ourselves was to take those science-based principles of the 5 domains model and interpret them into an accessible and engaging story for visitors. So work started in about 2016, and this was the project that we started with. So the guiding theme of it all was that there had to be a story about the relationship between the zoo and the animals in our care. A story of providing the best possible care while still constantly striving to improve. So that was kind of the guideline. The way we went about that was to set some objectives for the project. We wanted visitors to learn about what a positive welfare state for animals looks like and how the zoo encourages that, as well as learning about the particular species in the area where this installation is. So that's initially 3 species of monkeys that are in this area: squirrel monkeys, spider monkeys, and capuchins. And so we did that through highlighting the really positive welfare practices at the zoo. We also wanted a multi-sensory experience, something enjoyable, easy to use, and that includes the voices of staff, specifically those that work in animal care with the animals that the visitors can see. So the first installation, this one here, was completed in 2018 under the headline Happy Animals. So this name was chosen in preference to a specific reference to the 5 domains model because it's readily engaging and really easily understood by all audiences. So for example, a young child with limited language can easily understand the concept of being happy, where they probably can't quite grasp the idea of welfare, let alone something as complex as the affective state that we talk about in the 5 domains. So the box design was chosen as a really interactive installation that visitors could choose to use in their own way, whatever that's going to be. So people love to sit or climb on the boxes. They like to look at the questions and answer them together, look at the pictures, point out the animals that they can see if they're right there or ones they like to go and see later. And it's a really popular part of the zoo. They're so big and colourful that people always go straight to them and see what's happening. So after the success of that initial installation, the project was extended to other areas of the zoo. So we started small and then found it worked really well and wanted to keep doing that in other parts of the zoo. So the next ones we did, there were some more interpretation signs at the chimpanzee habitat, and as part of a revamp of the giraffe house, we put in a whole lot more things there as well. There are also some zoo-wide videos in a couple of locations with animal care staff talking specifically to the 5 domains in their area of work. So we're continuing to use this theme in new interpretation work and visitor experiences as we go along. Cool. So these are some of the ones at the giraffe house. And as you can see, it's all really clearly broken down into those 5 domains. And they've got really engaging pictures of the keepers working with the giraffes, quotes from them about how they use those 5 domains specifically in their day-to-day work. And so that's one of the things that visitors most enjoy, learning about how we look after the animals, but also feeling like they have a connection with the animals at the zoo through those people that work with them day to day. They also really like pointing out the pictures of people and going, I can see that person down there, they're doing whatever it is they're doing. So that's quite a nice touch as well. Alongside all of these kind of informal learning opportunities for all visitors, we also offer a school learning session for primary schools called Caring for Animals, and it is based entirely on the 5 domains. So this is our most popular learning session topic for primary schools. It's one that links in a lot of different ways to the curriculum or to schools' learning inquiries that they're doing. And it's also really fun. So lots of people come for this. While they're here, those learners discover each domain in relation to a particular animal. So we split it down into several pieces. So they might learn about nutrition with the otters. They might learn about environment and how we create a good environment with, say, the spider monkeys. And they might learn about animal health and vet care with a stand-in animal or soft toy as pictured, and experience some form of enrichment as well to show how we encourage animals to use their natural behaviours. Being able to point out the happy animals interpretation areas, the boxes and the signs, is also a really easy way to link the zoo's physical environment to what we're learning about together in that learning session as well. All right, so to kind of sum up, the project was set up by a relatively small team. And I think that's kind of the point I want to make, is that it was a pretty small team. It's actually a really simple idea, but it's had a very big effect. And it's been something that we've then been able to extend across the zoo. So we've expanded into new areas, new visitor experiences, easy way to incorporate learning about animal welfare into the zoo experience, about what the zoo actually does, and help people come along on that journey with us. So whether that's in an informal setting, looking around in their own time, or a more formal learning situation with our team. So ultimately, the project was all about creating a way to help people love and support the zoo and the zoo's work through understanding that animal welfare work that's important to us and so important to our community. Thank you so much for listening today. It's been a very great privilege and pleasure to share with you what we've been doing, and I hope that you can all take something away from that.
Kira, thanks, Charles. That was a great presentation, really interesting work going on at Wellington Zoo. If you've got any questions or comments for Charles, pop those in the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll get those to those later. So we're going to move swiftly from New Zealand over to North America and to Amanda Belinsky. Amanda is the Director of Guest Engagement at Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago in the United States. So hi, Amanda, and over to you.
All right, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here today to talk about Chapter 5 and how Lincoln Park Zoo has integrated animal care and welfare into conservation education. There we go. First, I'd like to share our guidelines for having animals participate in conservation education experiences. We have 4 guiding principles that all of our animal encounters must align with. The first is that animals in the program can choose whether or not to participate and engage with guests during that program. The second is that animals must remain in their primary habitat during the program. The third is that all animal encounter programs align with the animal's natural history and husbandry routines. And the fourth is that contact with animals only happens in the context of care. In 2019, we remodeled our entire suite of animal encounters so that we were only offering programs that met all of these criteria. The programs that we kept included our Malott family penguin encounters, Groom the goats, and Feed the chickens. During Malott family penguin encounters, guests are invited into a special part of the penguin's zoo habitat. The penguins are allowed to enter the space at any time and can exit at any time, and guests do not touch the penguins while they're present. During Groom the goats, guests are allowed to enter the goat's yard and groom them with brushes. The goats remain in their yard during the entire experience and can move to a specific part of the yard, which is away from guests, if they no longer want to be groomed. Finally, for Feed the chickens, guests enter a special area outside the chicken yard and can offer food to the chickens with special feeders. The chickens have the choice whether or not to take food from guests, and they can move away from guests to another part of their habitat if they don't want to be near people. Now, we had planned to expand the number or to start expanding the number of programs that we offered, animal encounter programs that we offered in 2020, but the COVID-19 pandemic stalled our progress. So creating more types of encounter programs with different types of species is still part of our strategic plan, and all of those would align with these guidelines. Now, prior to 2019, we had a long-standing program called Meet an Animal, during which small mammals and reptiles were removed from their primary habitat and brought out for members of the public to meet and to touch. We felt confident, though, sunsetting this program and making the changes that we did based in part on data from a study that a staff member conducted at the zoo on levels of guest engagement in different types of animal encounter program scenarios. So, for example, one that we looked at was a scenario where educators took animals out of their habitat and held them for guests to touch while facilitating a program. That is the hold touch scenario on the screen. Another type of scenario was one where guests were invited to observe an animal interacting with enrichment in a habitat while an educator facilitated a program. And that's the box no touch scenario on the screen. The data that we got from the study showed that guests reported having the highest level of a positive emotional response to a program when they were able to observe animals interacting with enrichment in a naturalistic environment, rather than being held and passed around for guests to touch. On top of this, guests overwhelmingly reported that their favorite part of an animal encounter, whether it was hold, touch, box, or not, were the conservation educators that delivered the program. This was awesome data to receive and reinforced for us the power of interpretation and the impact that educators can have during a program. And we have had an impact. All three of the animal encounters I just talked about earlier, penguin encounters, Groom the goats, and Feed the chickens, have been evaluated by our animal welfare science team, and they are all highly engaging to guests without any negative impact on animal welfare. Malott family penguin encounters, for example, effectively connect guests to the penguins without guests touching the penguins or us removing the penguins from their primary habitat. Observation of the penguins' behavior during the program also shows that there's no aggression in the colony and that welfare is good during the program. The voluntary program style is likely the key to their comfort during the program. Next, I'll share how we approach conservation education about animal management, healthcare, and welfare. We have three core stories that we strive to tell at the zoo, and animal care is first among them. The image here on the screen is a shot of the landing page for our website, lpzoo.org. It communicates these three storylines of care, conservation, and science, and community, which comes straight from a zoo-wide interpretive plan that we wrote in 2017. We did all of our interpretive planning in-house in just under 18 months. So while this may be a process that you consider hiring a consultant for, it is something that you can do on your own if you're able to dedicate the time and the resources to the project. Over the past 4 years, we've been updating all of our interpretive signage on grounds to align with our zoo-wide interpretive plan and reinforce our core stories. So this means that signs about animal management, health care, and welfare are starting to show up all over the zoo. For example, the exhibit themes for our small mammal reptile house and the primate house both support the topic of care. We're currently writing signs about how we manage different species living under the same roof in our small mammal reptile house, and we already have a sign all about the science of animal welfare in our primate house. We also facilitate animal feeding programs on grounds each day with care-based themes and have cart-based programs about how we record animal observations, and how we provide animals with enrichment that we can roll anywhere around the zoo. Lastly, we also work to integrate animal care messages between signage and programs. The theme at our Kovler Seal Pool exhibit is training demonstrates our commitment to care. And that is a message that we share verbatim in our twice daily seal training and feeding program, and that we reiterate throughout signage around the pool, some examples of which are on the screen. Now, while we have not evaluated our new signs at the seal pool yet, they were just installed last month, we do know from surveys that we've given out after seal training that a majority of guests do rate the zoo's commitment to animal care as high following a seal training program. In summary, we've really embraced the recommendations in Chapter 5 and find that guests do support our commitment to providing animals with great care and welfare, and they enjoy learning about the ins and outs of animal care. If you have any questions or would like access to the publications associated with our welfare studies for penguins, goats, or chickens, please feel free to send me an email. I'd love to hear from you, and thanks.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was a really interesting talk, and great that you're happy to share some of the resources. We do get lots of people wanting to take a deeper dive into those kind of research projects. So remember, if you've got a question for Charles or Amanda, now's the time to have a think about that and pop that in the chat box. Before we get to our panel session, I'm just going to share a few slides. Hopefully somebody can give me a nod to say, can you see that on the screen now? Brilliant, thanks, Amanda. And so I've just got a few slides to share. First of all is a plug to say hopefully you're enjoying our webinar series, but we do have 3 more to go. They are scheduled on the first Wednesday or Thursday of every month. They vary in time zones to make sure that we kind of be representative to the different IZD regions. We still have conservation and sustainability, training and professional development, and evaluation and evidence to go. So if you would like to be one of our speakers, you could be here in a couple of months sharing your stories. So please get in contact with me about that. You'll notice that I've highlighted we do have a break in October, and that's because we have the International Conservation Education Conference scheduled, which is a joint venture between IZD and EAZA. And I've popped the link so you can find out more details there. So if you do want to be a speaker, do get in contact. I also thought I'd share a bit of interesting information about the way that this chapter was developed. And so one of the early points in the strategy development was asking the zoo and aquarium community to identify what were the priority topics for the strategy, what were the biggest challenges. And interestingly, one of the most frequent topics and themes that came out of the survey was connected to animal care and welfare, and how we as educators could bring that into our conversations. So out of all that data that was given to me, I did a thematic analysis, and there were 2 very clear strands, which then formed the recommendations for this chapter. So the first covers the different ways that animals are involved in conservation education programs and activities and interactions with the audiences, and you'll see that connects to the first recommendation in this chapter. The second theme that came out of the data centered around that kind of perceived lack of understanding still from our audiences about what zoos actually do related to animal care and welfare, and how we as zoo and aquariums can take a more proactive approach to communicate how we care about those animals. So just thinking about that first recommendation, I wanted to share this slide, which kind of gives you a link to WZACES human-animal interaction guidelines. The first recommendation says that we've got to comply with WZA or your own regional guidelines on human-animal interactions. They are really easy to find. Here is the link to them. They are translated into a number of different languages. And the guidelines are based on scientific recommendations provided in the World Zoo and Aquarium Animal Welfare Strategy, and aim to provide guidance and promoting animal visitor interactions that prioritize that positive animal welfare state. And connected to the second recommendation, the chapter includes some ways in which zoos and aquariums should prioritize conservation education that builds audiences' knowledge and understanding and positive attitudes towards the range of works that zoos do, both for the animals in their care and also species in the wild. So at this point, I thought I'd just share a few things that we do at Auckland Zoo and how we communicate to our different audiences around the 5 domains of animal welfare and the science of care. So firstly, we do have training for all the staff and volunteers around the 5 domains and how they can include them in daily conversations and chats with our guests. On the screen, you can see the top right is some of our volunteer story cards. So we have those story cards for each of the species in the zoo, and also around main things like animal care, species conservation, and things like that. So we do have that support for our volunteers, and we've had some really great feedback from both the visitors and the volunteers about how we structure and frame our conversations around animal care. You'll also see that we have some other resources. So more recently, we've launched a Science of Care campaign. There is a website, a web page that you can go to, and we've put the link at the bottom there, which really kind of acknowledges the science behind what we do at the zoo. We also have at the moment a number of different links through social media to our keepers, to our animal care and conservation staff, talking about science-based animal care. So really thinking about how can we get that out of the zoo online through our different kind of media platforms. And lastly, I just wanted to share this, which I think is a great, fun, novel way to start thinking about animal care and conservation. And this is a current campaign that's going on outside of the zoo, the Science of Care campaign. And you'll see from these are some of the examples of posters of how we are talking about what we do at the zoo in a quite an interesting, novel way. It is aimed at independent adults. But to give you an example, if you go to the far right, you can see it says, Jamila the rhino went into labour in Tommy's bedroom. Then the white writing below talks about that we actually have a partnership with Panasonic, which meant that we could have a link from Tommy's tablet. Tommy is the head of ungulates, that really could give a live link to when Jamila went into labour at 3 a.m. He was the first to know and could do something about it. And then at the bottom, there is that link to the kind of health domain, and also a link to that website that I showed before. And again, we've had some really interesting responses by using this novel approach, and our marketing and communication team really getting on board about how we can use the 5 domains in a new, fresh way to start talking about what we do. So I thought I'd just share that because this is going on right now at Auckland Zoo. If you want any more information, you can see there's a link to the website there, or do ask me in the panel session as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and then we're going to go over to our panel session. And at this point, I'd like to introduce Leanne. Leanne Wilson is the General Manager of Community Conservation and Learning at Zoos Victoria in Australia, and is also the current IZD Journal Editor. So good morning to you, Leanne. Do you want to just tell us a bit more about your role with IZD and how that works?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And it's great to be joining you with this webinar as the IZD board representative. So IZD is committed to conservation of biodiversity, and also about expanding the educational impact of members all over the world. And we support IZD members with training and resources and sharing stories such as this webinar and support. And one of those ways that we also help to build that best practice understanding and also facilitate those sharing of those stories is through the IZD Journal. And so it's my role to coordinate the journal from the process of working with the regional representatives to solicit articles and submissions from member organisations all over the world, and then helping to edit those articles and working with another board member, Akana Haitai, to design that journal. IZD's also brought in a volunteer program this year, which is absolutely exciting, about how we can bring more people in supporting members all over the world. And so I'm really fortunate to also have 4 volunteers that have jumped on to help me through the editing and proofreading phase of those journals. I really want to encourage everyone to think about submitting an article. We are going through the process of pulling together this year's IZD journal, and it's a really exciting one. And do look out for that, because it does share stories and effective programs that align with all the chapters of the strategy. And keep an eye out for that, but also turn your head to thinking about what you can share and submit for next year's journal. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Leanne. I'm going to stick with you, Leanne, and ask a general question about the strategy. So, given your career in conservation education, what do you think the strategy brings to the table? What new, fresh things, what kind of change in direction can you see this conservation education strategy bringing to our community?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think that what this strategy does is it really calls out and signals the value of what we do as conservation educators. And it really puts conservation education as a critical part of each of our organisation's missions. So having this as a global strategy, it's something that we can take back to each of our organisations and embed and talk to, really use as a talking point to how we can actually deliver these effective programs and the part that we can play. I also think that the strategy is an amazing strategy because it's that global approach to high quality conservation education. And with the series of recommendations, it's essentially, I see it as a bit of a guide and that map. And having those recommendations there means that it meets each organisation's where they are on that journey. So being able to use the audit tool at the back to look for where are the gaps and areas for improvement ensures that we'll all be moving together all across our conservation education community towards delivering the most effective conservation education programs that we have. One that builds the impact that each of our organisations can make in our part of the world, but also as an IZE community, it helps to build that collective impact that we're really looking for to conserve global biodiversity.
Great answer, thank you so much. We're going to go over to our chat because we do have some questions. We've got one for you, Charles, from Amy Stevens. Have you and the team taken the Happy Animals project onto your zoo social media platforms, online or YouTube channels? If not, have you got any future plans for those kind of ways of talking about it?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Amy. So yes, we have got the videos of the animal care staff talking about the 5 domains as it relates to their work on the Wellington Zoo YouTube channel. So hop on over there and have a look. They are really fun. So highly recommended. Great,
thank you, Charles. We've got a question for you, Amanda, from Leanne. Thanks, Leanne. And she's interested to know more about how you brought your education presentation staff along the journey to giving animals choice and control in those encounters.
Yeah, great question. Well, first and foremost, there was a lot of open communication about the changes that were happening internally before they happened and while they were happening. But then also, the education staff had about 2 years where we were conducting both penguin encounters under those new animal guidelines and our meat and animal program, which were conducted without those guidelines. And so education staff, we launched penguin encounters in 2017. So by the time we got to 2019 and we're making these changes, education staff they felt the difference in what a program like penguin encounters was like for them to facilitate for the penguins and for guests, and what it was like to facilitate meat and animal, both for guests and the animals in themselves. So it was kind of easy once we got there because of that.
Great, thank you. And then I guess for both Amanda and Charles, hopefully, you can tell it's a journey that you've been on, that you're going on. And so I guess I'm really interested to learn more about what's the biggest learnings, what are the things that you can see that there's a big shift in your organization because of the process you're going on with the project. So Charles, maybe we come to you first. And again, thinking about, on the Happy Animals project, what was one of the biggest learnings that you can reflect on in this process?
Yeah, sure. I guess for us, the big thing to take away was that communicating about animal welfare doesn't have to be really complex. I mean, it can be a really big topic, it can be really complicated, but it doesn't have to be. It can be quite simple. You can start small. visitors want to hear about that work. So anything that we get out there is going to be really valuable. And it is okay to start small with something pretty simple, but is really accessible and engaging. And then you can extend it further if that works. So yeah, that would be the big one for us. It's important work for us, but it's also important for the community to know about. And anything you get out there is going to be really good.
Great. And over to you, Amanda. Anything else to add?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with what Charles said about communicating animal care. People want to know about it. For us with our animal experiences, for me, it was that touching an animal it's not the only way to foster empathy or create an engaging experience. People don't need that. By caring for an animal, we can foster empathy, or just, to me, an educator can touch the heart and the mind of a person. That person doesn't have to touch an animal to have an experience be really engaging. So those were just, they seem obvious, but they were mind-blowing moments for me.
Great, thank you. And the other thing that I know a lot of viewers are thinking about is, did you have a big budget, lots of people? Like, how does it work? Imagine if one of our viewers is at the start of this process thinking about integrating animal care and welfare into conservation education. What top tips do you three have about how you can start on that kind of process and journey? So maybe if we start with you, Amanda, and what are your top tips for getting started on this kind of journey?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we were able to, from a lot of family penguin encounters, we were building a new penguin habitat. So we were able to pre-plan for that and build that space out. That took money, time, planning. But for groom the goats and feed the chickens, we just started with what we had and where we were. We made some minor modifications to animal habitats to allow guests to participate in those programs in a way that met those guidelines for us. And we didn't try to push ourselves too far and too fast to do anything else. Case in point, 2020 came. That was a priority for us in that year, but that didn't happen. We're hoping we'll get to it next year, but again, we have to start with where we are.
Great. Charles?
Yeah, I'd say, top tips for how to communicate how we care for animals. I'd say, base it in what you're doing, base it in that science, all that great work that you are doing, but tell it story, because people really engage with the story. They love to have that personal connection. And like Amanda's saying, it doesn't have to be by touching an animal. There are so many ways that you can do it. It can be something relatively simple, but creating that personal connection between the animals and the visitors, and even the animal care staff and the visitors as well. So making them feel part of the story. And that's going to be a really fun thing, in a way that people will feel that they're involved and that they will love it all the more. Yeah.
Great. And then over to you, Leanne, whether it is comments on this chapter or the strategy in general. We know we have a lot of people who may be at different places in their conservation education journey. Any advice that you would give if you've got somebody wanting to start unpacking the strategy more, implementing those changes? What kind of top tips have you got to help on that journey?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Amanda said about starting small, starting with what you've got, but also about fostering that communication with your team and your broader zoo or aquarium staff as well. And in terms of unpacking it, I think that really first critical point is socializing that strategy and talking to people about it and getting building understanding through that, but also getting their perspectives on how they think that as an organization you can meet that strategy. Then it's, you don't need to put big budgets behind making big changes and big improvements. It's starting small. We started again looking at how we actually also give animals choice and control, hence my question, because it is a journey taking staff along from what we normally do to a new area. And we started small with starting with a mobile stick that actually comes up next to a snake enclosure. So rather than taking the snake out, letting that snake actually have that choice to come out onto the stick, which then actually came out closer to the students in an education program. And that's just starting with our works team to say, hey, can we fashion something? And actually, working with our reptile keepers, they regularly change that stick over from where they've placed it, so it actually has different smells from different environments in the zoo to, also aid in the enrichment of the snake. So, that was a first step that we've taken, and it's the first one really just to start to change that. And that came through that conversation with both our works teams, our life sciences teams, and our education teams sitting down and unpacking what we could do.
Great, thank you, Leanne. And I guess the last piece of that I'm interested in is around how do you collect feedback? How do you know things are working? What kind of effect are you having because of the things you're doing? So if you want to reflect on any evaluation, any kind of collecting of data that you're doing, and what does success look like for all three of you in terms of thinking about that animal care and conservation education piece? So maybe if we come over to you, Amanda, if we can start with you. I know you had some data collection, and do you want to just talk about that process and where you're at with it at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're lucky. We have an animal welfare science team here at Lincoln Park Zoo. They're amazing. And our director of that center, along with some interns that were brought on to facilitate different specific evaluations, were able to look at penguin encounters, groom the goats, and feed the chickens. These were, I'm not an evaluator, but from what I understand, they were not long standing studies. They were done in a few weeks or a few months. And they were looking primarily at animal welfare, but were able to dig into guest engagement a little bit. Largely because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have not done any specific learning evaluation of the programs yet. It's a plan that we have, of course, but from a lot of family penguin encounters, we have done surveys of that program, and people have self-reported that they really enjoyed the program. They're telling us that the educators are fantastic. So, we see that people are enjoying the program, even though they're not touching the penguins. We want to dig into that with evaluation about learning outcomes, but we know that welfare is good.
Great, thank you. And over to you, Charles. What kind of things are you doing to measure success?
All right, so regarding the Happy Animals project specifically, we've got a lot of anecdotal evidence from the way that visitors interact with the installations and the kind of questions and things that they say to our staff, the visitor rangers or the educators. And some of the comments we get in the visitor surveys as well refer specifically to how the animals are cared for and show that they've really taken in those ideas. So that's really good to see that what we're putting out there, people are actually engaging with and understanding and then taking that along with them. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Charles. And then Leanne, over to you. I know you said that you're at the kind of the start of your journey, but what kind of things are you putting in place to kind of collect that evidence as you go, and what are you finding out so far?
Yeah, we're also really fortunate. We do have an animal welfare science team that collects a lot of data on the animals. We also have, I have a social scientist in my team who also helps us collecting data on the people and the impact different encounters has on that. But even just through participating in this webinar, there's new things that I've learned from both Charles and Amanda. And Amanda, I'm really impressed with your approach of putting both of those together. Measuring the impact of one encounter both on the animal as well as the people, and also the way that communicating a high quality animal care to your visitors. But the advice I'd probably give on starting that is that, again, we did start small. So we started looking at the impact of one encounter. We started out with the Lord Howe Island stick insect, and it was basically around that question, similar to what you presented, Amanda, was do students need to actually touch Lord Howe Island stick insect to fall in love with it and care for it and be willing to contribute to its conservation. And same thing, we found there was no difference with different treatments that we had. There were high care and recognition and willing to help the Lord Howe Island stick insect in the 3 encounter options, but one was touching, one was viewing it through a box, and one was looking at an artifact of it. So basically its exoskeleton. and there was no significant difference between each of those three. So again, we came to the conclusion that it was down to the staff member, but we didn't actually measure that as well as you did, Amanda. But really, we did that with our education team and sat down and picked an encounter that we'd like to actually look at. And so started on the one, and we'll be working our way through looking at different encounters from there. So I think even if you don't have a social scientist on staff, you can start small and just focus in on the one encounter and move out from there.
Great, thank you so much, Leanne. We have come to the end of our questions. I can't see any more on our chat. So what we'll do right now is we're going to go over to our IZD membership video. This just kind of talks about the benefits of being a member and gives you an idea of how you can join if you're not already a member. So Kim, if you have that video ready, over to you.
Enjoyed the IZD webinar? Looking for more professional development and networking opportunities with fellow educators from across the globe? Why not grab the chance and join the IZE now? Founded in 1972, our vision is to conserve global biodiversity through effective zoo and aquarium programs. With our worldwide members' continuous effort, we conserve biodiversity through encouraging sustainable behaviors in people that visit zoos and aquariums. The International Zoo Educators Association offers 3 types of membership, with a wide range of professional development programs and events for capacity building, information and resources, and networking opportunities for educators and professionals at only $20 a year for Category 1 Associate member. Do not miss our upcoming events, webinars, and conference. Be part of the community. Join us now.
Great, thank you, Kim. We are nearly at the end of our webinar, and I really want to thank our speakers, Amanda and Charles. Thank you so much for sharing your kind of story. We're getting lots of great positive feedback in the chat about your presentations. Also to Leanne, as our IZD journal editor, great comments from you about the strategy and how we can get on that journey. Before we do finish, we've got a couple of polls just to check in with you, the viewers, about how we're doing. So Kim, if you want to share those polls, you should be able to see if you're viewing live. There are two questions. So the first one is, how valuable did you find this webinar for your journey with the World Zoo and Aquarium Conservation Education Strategy? And there's some different responses. And then the second question, what would you like to see in future webinars connected with the strategy? So do you want more case studies, more explanation from each recommendation, more question and answers in the panel, or did we get it right? Do you want to keep the same mix as this webinar? So we'll give you a couple of minutes just to have a think about that, and then we'll have a look at the results. Okay, so the results are in. So happily we can see that everybody puts either very valuable or extremely valuable in terms of finding this webinar useful for your journey with the strategy. So great to see. And then for future webinars, you'd like to see more case studies, which is great to hear. And we will certainly kind of find different speakers and future webinars to share their stories. So we're going to close that poll now. Again, thank you so much to our speakers and our panelists. Thank you to you, the viewers. And if you're watching on our YouTube channel, do have a look at the other webinars in our series, and we'll see you next month for Chapter 6. Thanks and goodbye.